Hello, everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time I'd like to talk about some other things we should be thinking about when we're discussing stereotypes. First, it's this notion of it's a normal brain process. It's a way to quickly identify data in our minds, pull up information, and make quick responses and adjustments as we move throughout our day. So, this is the one thing about stereotypes that is normal and that we are all doing it. We do want to make fast decisions for a lot of low level things. We don't want to clutter up our day having to intently think about every small little decision that comes by. No, we want to make decisions fairly quickly, smoothly. We want to be consistent in our behavior and so forth. But one thing about stereotypes, other than it's a normal brain process, is again, when we start categorizing and labeling our stereotypical thoughts about groups of people, we tend to do it in these other ways you can see up here. So we take those categories and labels we've created about people, and we sort of attach a multisensory experience to them. In other words, we attach some flavor to that memory or that little cache of information we have in our minds about that group of people. Um, there's a certain tone, in other words, we associate with those beliefs about that group. And so it might not just be about ethnicity. We tend to use these multi-sensory sorts of attachments to many things that we categorize and use as information in our daily lives. Um, it's interesting because these could be about a variety of things we never really think of, but it might be some stereotypical thinking that we have a certain tone or flavor attached to someone's use of a regional dialect, a person's choice of food, the way someone dresses or their choice of clothing, things like that. We tend to use these multi-sensory sorts of experiences and attach them to give flavor and color to those sorts of facts that we have in those areas of our mind. Sometimes these are rational and sometimes they're not. That's the problem with stereotypes. And stereotypes affect our attitudes in our political arena, certainly. They affect policy and they affect legislation. So we can look at them as either a rational or an irrational stereotype. Now, a rational stereotype is one that'll help you make better decisions because they may have a small kernel of truth. The rational stereotype, therefore, is based on some evidence that it is true, that is more or less true. And that's what we see. Um, One rational stereotype about postal workers, and there are some negative ones, which I'll mention at some point, but a rational stereotype about postal workers is they always get the job done, they always get the mail delivered, and so forth. And therefore, we expect that from them. And we reinforce that stereotype in all our thinking because it does seem to have that small kernel of truth. And indeed, they do act that way and they do their best. Um, the rational stereotype, therefore, being based on evidence, allows us to predict behavior in groups and individuals. It's not meant to be judgmental, it is meant to be a rational tool. Um, the irrational stereotype is the opposite, and it tends to be reinforced and strengthened. So, whereas a rational stereotype, every time we see it happen in action, we go, ah, it's so true. Um, but we see something that contradicts maybe our irrational stereotype about people, and we do not update. And we tend to reinforce the negative view that we already have. So, irrational stereotypes in general, in particular the ones that we hold about other groups of people, are without adequate evidence. And that's the real difference between irrational and rational thinking and stereotypes. One's based on some evidence and the other is based on none. Um, Often these irrational stereotypes, as I've discussed before, are based on some type of emotional need. And so we notice behaviors that tend to prove the truth of our stereotypes, but we'll exclude that evidence that disproves a negative stereotype. And we might quickly just dismiss it. Oh, that's a rare exception. And because of this general mindset, we don't update our categories of information in our mind or our labels. The categories and labels become that rigid. They don't change. Uh, they become reinforced in all their negativity. Um, it's just as easy to form a rational stereotype as it is an irrational one. But the irrational ones always have an emotional connection. And because of this emotional connection, it's very difficult to change our thinking when we possess that irrational stereotype. So we sometimes justify dislike about groups of people. This is about how prejudiced persons use discrimination to act out how they feel about a certain group that they dislike. And they will use any imagined or real behavior that seems to prove the stereotype to justify why they dislike that group. And there's usually an emotional component, of course, attached to this. And the emotions in play when we justify our dislike of some group of people are powerful ones like fear and distrust and suspicion and outright dislike. So stereotypes do affect us in the laws we make, the policies we adopt, the legislation that gets passed and debated, and so forth, because all people hold stereotypical attitudes, and sometimes this does get codified into the way we follow the law and the way we think over time. Okay, folks, that's all I want to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.